feel like I should have some music or something going just while
Yeah,
we're
we should
waiting.
have.
Okay, so it is 6:30. We are going to start promptly just so we can be mindful of everyone's time and get into our conversation this evening. So, hello everyone. My name is Whitney Long Jones. I am the Community Engagement and Equity Manager for Ohio City Incorporated. And this is part three of our Ohio City Climate Change Community Conversation Series. So, thank you for joining us tonight. We have a great presentation lined up for you, and I would love to start the conversation by giving a little bit of background, where I will let Judy talk about, who is a resident in Ohio City, talk a little bit about how she's been inspired by climate change and what really um, inspired her to put on this event, who I've been working with the entire time. So please, Judy.
Well, hi everyone, welcome. And I just wanted to say that about a year ago or so, I'm retired now, and I became very interested in what was going on with climate change. And I approached folks at the community of St. Peter, of which is a faith community of which I'm a part of. And I said, you know, this is really happening, and we really need to be aware of this. And I think we ought to start some community discussions about this. And I said, I'd like to approach the Community Development Corporation where I live and see if they would be interested in partnering with us on this series. So indeed, I approached Whitney and with Ohio City Incorporated and asked if they would like to do this with us and be a co-sponsor, and they said yes. And so this is our third presentation on a series of topics all related to climate change. We're thrilled tonight to have Jason Wood with the Office of Sustainability from the City of Cleveland. And our two previous conversations, we had one about 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, with Neil Wagner with the Ohio Sierra Club on the Beyond Coal campaign. And then back in October, we had a discussion on the Green New Deal, all of which have garnered lots of attention. So I'm not going to spill the beans about what Jason's going to talk about, but I'm just saying that this is part of an ongoing conversation that our faith community wants to have, and with anyone who will join us. But we're focused right now in Ohio City, and we're thrilled to be part of this. So Whitney, take it away.
Thank you, Judy. So I do want to say before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping rules. We will, after this introduction, we'll let Jason give his presentation, and then we'll do a Q&A, question and answer session, where we would like it to be more conversational. We are asking that everyone keep their phones and computers muted, and you're welcome to turn your camera on or turn it off, completely up to you. So if you have questions or comments, feel free to put that into the chat, and we will address that when we get to that portion of the conversation. So stay tuned. We are also going to be raffling off 3 of a book selected by Jason Wood, and we'll let you all know what that is later on. So I'll pass it to Jason.
Great. Thanks, Whitney. Thanks, Judy, for having me. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And while that loads up, as Whitney and Judy both mentioned, my name is Jason Wood. I am the city's chief of sustainability. In this role, I report directly to Mayor Jackson and are responsible for the operations of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability and really work to oversee climate, all of the efforts that the city is undertaking to mitigate the effects of climate change on the environmental, the economic, and human health of Cleveland's residents. I've been in this position a little over a year, so still fairly new in this job, but I did spend the better part of the previous 8-9 years working in the city's utilities department. I'm really excited for this conversation. when Judy reached out to me, the first time it was probably about a year ago when Judy and I talked. It was really kind of exciting to hear residents really taking the lead and having some discussions around this. And just it's an exciting thing to be a part of that. Before I jump in, I want to warn you about a couple of things. So I'm doing this from home, like a lot of folks are. It's bedtime. I have two 18-month-old twins. I guess two twins is redundant. I have 18-month-old twins and a 5-year-old. So if you're crying and screaming in the back, just ignore it. You might see a little blonde head kind of float in and out here and there. I'll try to keep him out of here, but you never know. The second warning I will give you, I am a reformed academic. My Ph.D. is in political science, but I'm a quantitative methodologist by training. So I really, really love measurement and numbers and indicators. I know that's not for everybody, so I'll try to keep that to a minimum as much as I can. But as we go through the presentation, you'll see a little bit about how we're working that into what we're doing in the Office of Sustainability. So what I think I'd like to do for the next, 25, 30 minutes or so is walk through our Sustainable Cleveland Climate Action Plan with a particular focus on how we're embedding equity into that and why that's important to us. And then talk about a few of the specific projects that we've got going on right now that we're really trying to use to put this into practice and impact our community. The best place to start is probably to tell you a little bit about Sustainable Cleveland. I've got the vision statement up there on the slide. I'm not going to read that to you. But the Sustainable Cleveland is an initiative that's run out of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. Originally, it was conceived as a 10-year initiative anchored to the 50th anniversary of the Cuyahoga River catching on fire for the last time. But because of some of the successes that we had through that initial 10-year period, we really decided to continue the initiative on and use as a way to engage people to come together to kind of develop these thriving and resilient neighborhoods that are really focused on building economic, social, and environmental well-being for everybody. At this point, I'd like to think we've been fairly successful. I think we can kind of point to some successes that we've had as we've really looked to build a foundation for sustainability throughout our community. Since launching Sustainable Cleveland about 12 years ago now, we've been able to engage over 15,000 people from across the community, about 6,000 of them through our annual summits. Hopefully some of you have had the opportunity to attend one of those events. And this has really been kind of critical in helping us to develop a blueprint for how we can reduce our carbon footprint and create these healthy, thriving, and resilient neighborhoods. Additionally, we've had over 700 people participate in 53 different working groups focused on trees, zero waste, water quality, a whole bunch of different things. Some of these have turned into businesses, some of them have turned into nonprofits that are really playing a critical role as we look to advance sustainability in our neighborhoods and beyond. But I think at a high level, probably the biggest success is that we've been able to come together as a community and make a lot of really tangible progress around renewable energy, local foods, clean water, sustainable transportation, green space access, a whole host of different things. All of that work is managed by the Office of Sustainability. I like to think we're small but mighty. There are 10 of us on staff. These are pictures of our staff engaged in various sustainable activities. So our work is really kind of cross-departmental. We work with pretty much every department in the city of Cleveland and really touch on a wide variety of policy areas. So we've tried to build out a team that has a diverse set of backgrounds. We have dedicated energy management resources. So we have an energy management team that has finance professionals and engineers who are looking at ways we can reduce our emissions, who can lower costs for the city, for the residents. We've got another group that's really focused on natural systems and looks at connecting the community to vibrant green spaces, expanding our tree canopy, a whole host of different activities, waste management, really how are we maintaining and interacting with the unbuilt environment. And then we have another batch of team members who really look more broadly at kind of the neighborhood level. So these folks have backgrounds in planning, design, architecture, communications, engagement. And these are really the resources that help us kind of bring this all together and put it into action at a neighborhood level. So that's a little history, a little bit about the team, but what are we doing? So we kind of keep referencing all this work that has to be done. What does that entail? The best summary for that is probably our Cleveland Climate Action Plan. So let's talk a little bit about what that is and why it's important. At a high level, a climate action plan is just a document that outlines the course of action necessary to address the challenges associated with climate change. They are context-specific documents, so it needs to be tailored to the unique challenges that a community is facing. So if you look at Cleveland's plan versus other cities, and other cities do have climate action plans, they're going to have different elements, they're going to have different objectives, because everybody's context and everybody's local challenges are a little bit different. In Cleveland, we put our first plan together in 2013. In that plan, we really organized our work around this overarching goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 80% over a 2010 baseline by 2050. And we set interim goals along the way, but we really wanted our plan to push us toward a longer term sustainable outcome. As you can see, the chart on the right kind of outlines what our annual emission counts are, and you can see we're making progress. Those green bars are getting lower and lower and lower. Between 2010 and 2018, which is the last year we have really kind of complete data on, we've been able to reduce our emissions by about 9%. And also, like many places around the world, we're seeing a decoupling of our emissions and economic activity. That's that kind of bluish line there on the chart that you see. So while we've seen kind of a 9% reduction in emissions, real GDP at the county level, which is our best measure, has gone up about 20%. So we're seeing kind of a more kind of carbon efficient economic activity happening, which is encouraging. This is kind of what we want to see, because for a long time, you wouldn't have seen that trend kind of pop up the way that it does. We updated our climate action plan in 2018. We carried that emissions focus and that long-term goal forward, but we also made an intentional choice in that planning process to bring equity to the forefront. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and how we did that and why we did that as we go through the rest of the presentation. While we're obviously still focused that big picture goal on emissions, the 2018 CAP update was really also taking into account a lot of benefits that are beyond emissions reductions, right? So we see creating green jobs, we see sustainable economic development, kind of making homes more efficient and more comfortable, creating healthier and more comfortable communities, improving air quality, and really trying to empower people with information so that they can be active participants as we look to kind of reduce our overall climate and carbon impact. I apologize, this one's a little bit hard to see, I think, in this format, but this is essentially the high-level overview of the 2018 Climate Action Plan. And we'll put a link in the chat to the Climate Action Plan in case you want to download that and take a more detailed look. But if you can't see, we've got 5 focus areas, right? So we have energy efficiency and green building, clean energy, sustainable transportation, clean water and vibrant green space, and then more local food and less waste. So each of those 5 focus areas is then listed, is kind of cross-listed with a series of cross-cutting priorities. This includes equity in those cross-cutting priorities. And then each one of the focus areas, in order to operationalize that, we've kind of developed a series of objectives and specific actions and goals that we'll kind of see pop up as we talk about some of those specific projects that we're going to get into here in a minute or two. So I mentioned that equity was one of our cross-cutting priorities and is pretty important to everything that we're trying to do. So I do want to spend a minute talking about it relative to the CAP design and implementation process. Look, I think we've got to be honest with ourselves, and we know that the negative effects of climate change, like every other negative externality that we can think of, are not felt equally by all of our residents. Our low-income communities of color tend to be disproportionately impacted by climate change. Whether we're looking at environmental risks, social determinants of health, or the economic impacts of climate change, we tend to see that those who are already facing a high level of burden are disproportionately impacted when we take that into account. So our office's challenge, and this comes directly from Mayor Jackson, is really to figure out how we can use what we're doing from a climate adaptation and mitigation standpoint to do better. And we tried to bake this into our climate action plan. We were very intentional during the planning process in 2018 about embedding equity into that plan. And this intentionality really started at the development side of this. I think we really came in with one rule, and that was to have a very open engagement process. And I wasn't running the office at that point, but I was kind of the Department of Public Utilities lead as we interacted with this. And it was a really pretty impressive approach to do that. We had a 90-member Climate Action Advisory Committee, and that was instrumental in really building that base of experience in the sustainable space as a foundation for our planning process. And that is, without a doubt, critically important. But to a certain extent, these are individuals and organizations that are already active and already have access to the space, either directly or indirectly. And that's great. We need that. It's important subject matter expertise to have at the table. But from our perspective, it's not enough, right? And our keynote speaker at the 2020 Sustainability Summit was Dr. Julian Ajuman. He's a professor at Tufts University, and he literally wrote the book on just sustainabilities. And during his keynote address, which we do have a recording of, and we'll put a link in the chat to that as well, I think he said something that captures what we're trying to do in the Office of Sustainability and with Sustainable Cleveland probably a whole lot more succinctly and eloquently than I can. So I'll just flat out borrow it here. And that is that we too often use green and sustainable interchangeably, and we probably shouldn't do that, right? Green is green, and we all kind of understand what that means. But to be truly sustainable, it needs to be equitable as well. And for us, this means kind of breaking out of talking just to the people who are traditionally included in the planning process and getting that broader base of voices. And that's really what our CAP update process was designed to do. So in order to try to build that base and hear from some folks we don't normally hear from, we hosted 12 climate action planning workshops. And we wanted to make sure that our audience was as diverse as possible. So we spread them across the city and tried to have them from east to west, from lake to south. And you can see from the chart on the right that the racial makeup of the participants on the chart, while not completely representative of the city population in whole, it was a whole lot closer than I think we would normally be. We had over 300 people attend, and it was, I think, a really instructive process for us. We followed a learn more, say more, do more approach. I don't know if anybody's been through that process or not, but we really wanted to engage people around that most important thing that could happen to improve their neighborhood quality of life. And this seems a little odd and a little counterintuitive, but we deliberately did not ask them directly about climate change. Instead, we wanted to focus on more general needs and wants at the community level, and then work to tailor climate-based solutions to meet folks where they are and kind of fill that gap and that need. So we took that to kind of further embed equity. We had all of our Climate Action Advisory Committee members participate in Racial Equity Institute training. You can see here on the slide, we've actually had a large number of people outside of the Climate Action Advisory Committee process go through that. And if you haven't been through it, I would highly encourage you to do so. I believe we're still offering some of those throughout the region. It's an eye-opening experience. So we took what we learned from that training process. We took what we learned from the community meetings and really kind of work to develop this racial equity toolkit. And it's just a series of relatively simple, straightforward questions to evaluate how impactful we can be as we take action. So we asked ourselves things like, have communities of color been engaged? And does the proposed objective align with existing neighborhood priorities? How can we use data to track the outcome? And how can we disaggregate that data to illuminate any disparities that may be caused? Because some of our actions might actually make disparity and inequity worse, right? We had to look at who will benefit and who will be burdened. Everything carries costs, everything carries benefits. So how do we make sure we're balancing that in a way that's equitable across all of our residents? Does the proposed objective support communities of color and low-income populations as we look at workforce development and particularly accessing the economic opportunities associated with climate change? And then last, are we talking and using language that is easily understood and accessible? Are we avoiding jargon? Are we making sure that we're meeting folks where they are so that they can actively participate and engage in what we're trying to do? It's a great tool. Again, we'll drop another link in the chat to that. You may have to register with an email. I promise we won't spam you too much with that. But every single objective or action that we baked into our plan was evaluated using this tool. And if it didn't meet those objectives, we either altered it and updated it and changed it and restructured it so that it would, or it was deprioritized. So you can see we put a tremendous amount of equity into that plan. So as we move through the specific projects that we're going to talk about, you'll hear that come up and you should see how that work is kind of getting embedded in there as we move forward. So with that background, I guess I can start jumping into the projects. And I'll start with our Lead for Cities certification, right? So I mentioned a little bit ago that a lot of the initial focus of Sustainable Cleveland was anchored to the 50th anniversary of the Cuyahoga River fire, right? And hopefully some of you were able to participate in those celebratory Cuyahoga 50 events in 2019 that we really used to celebrate the progress we've made and then start us on the path for what needed to come next. And as we started to think about moving beyond 2019, we really needed to spend some time thinking about what we could use to kind of galvanize the community, because that 50th anniversary was really that point that we were all kind of driving towards. And we needed to figure out what that new thing to aim and drive towards was going to be. This was really, honestly, it was one of the first conversations that I had with Mayor Jackson after I accepted the job. And we really kind of outlined several challenges that we wanted to keep in mind as we made this decision of what to drive towards. And that was, how do we continue the momentum that we as a community have built over that initial 10-year period? How do we start to organize everything that we have going on? So whether it's city, whether it's community-based, whether it's, corporate-based, whether it's nonprofit, philanthropic, how do we organize all of that in a way that really maximizes our ability to create those healthier, thriving, and resilient neighborhoods? And then how do we do all of this in a way that improves quality of life for all of our residents, right? That's really what we're trying to get to. As we talked through what the best way to do that is, we kept coming back over and over again to that vision statement that I had up earlier, and this notion of creating a green city on a blue lake. And we wanted something that we could use to link all of this ongoing work together, that would allow us to benchmark our performance, and then also measure our progress going forward a little bit more effectively. As a result, we settled on setting an aggressive goal of becoming a LEED Platinum city. If you're familiar with LEED for buildings, LEED for cities works in much the same way. It's a numeric scale. It has prerequisites, it has credits, but it really is a tool to help guide communities and then cities to become more sustainable, more equitable, and more resilient. As we've worked with USGBC, we've seen that about 100 cities, it's maybe a little bit higher now, are certified, but less than 20 have received that platinum certification. So it's a pretty high bar. We like LEED for cities for a couple of reasons. First, it's a very holistic look at how we're doing. It blends information from city operations, but also brings in data from that broader community perspective. Second, we really like it because it's a critical focus on improving quality of life. Based on the mathematics of the scoring system, it is very, very difficult to get a platinum certification without tangibly improving quality of life. You get points for having the right policies in place and increasing programmatic efficiency. But at the end of the process, if we aren't making things better for the people we serve, we're not going to get to where we want to be from a rating standpoint. Additionally, we like LEED for cities because it aligns with a lot of our existing efforts, including our climate action plan. So you can see our CAP focus areas on the right. LEED for cities has 7 main categories. You can see them there. They look at how we structure our work, how we protect and maintain our unbuilt environment, how we look to leverage and interact with our built environment a little more sustainably. What does water access and quality look like across your community, and how do people engage with that? What are you doing on energy and greenhouse gas emissions? It takes a look at the entirety of your waste management process, and then has a lot of those quality of life measures that are really focused on distributional equity and environmental justice in particular. Another thing that we really liked about LEED for cities, though, is that it recognizes that it does not have all of the answers, right? So if you look at LEED for buildings, it's a very prescriptive system. LEED for cities isn't that way. They kind of have these 2 additional innovation and regional priority categories, where communities that are doing something particularly innovative or working out of the box or making connections to a broader network of things can get points and credits for those as well. And they're also open to changes due to current context, right? I think if we've learned anything over the last year, it's that we've got to be aware of what COVID is doing in our community and some of the impacts that has. So they've added potential credits already for this year for COVID response. We're getting close to finishing that application. I think we'll probably have it wrapped up in the next couple of weeks and should know more about our certification over the summer. I'll be very honest and tell you right up front, we're not going to certify as platinum this time. This is going to be an iterative process where, this will get a certification, and then in 3 years we'll recertify, and then 3 years after that, we'll probably be a little bit closer to that platinum certification. So shifting gears a little bit to something that's a little bit more kind of specific and focused on some of the CAP goals that we have, is what we've termed Cleveland's Clean and Equitable Energy Future Report. We just rolled this one out on Friday, so this is really one of the first groups that's getting to hear a little bit about this in detail. We've been working on this for a while, about a year or so, so we're pretty excited to be able to share it with everybody. You've seen this part before, but I mentioned it at the beginning. Our goal is to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050. And we've made progress on that, but we still have a ways to go. And as we think about what that path forward looks like, that conversation has to start with energy use, because energy use is such a substantial portion, about 49% of our overall emissions profile as a region. So a lot of that focus has been centered on two sub-goals related to energy use. One is to have 25% of our electricity used in Cleveland supplied by renewable sources by 2030. And then the other is to reach 100% of electricity demand from clean renewable sources by 2050. So the first of those, we've made progress, right? We've placed a lot of community focus on this to date, and that's on the supply side of the equation. So this is really focused on generation, or where are we getting our electricity from, right? Are we using coal and natural gas, or are we getting it from solar and wind and hydro and other things like that? So this chart really shows our clean energy supply in Cleveland for both CPP and CEI. If you look at that dark gray line kind of at the top there, that includes all of those sources plus renewable energy credits that we purchase through our community choice aggregation program. You can see we're at about 13%, which is halfway to our goal. And that's good. That's kind of where we want to be. We're kind of on pace. We need to keep moving, keep progress happening, but we're handling the supply side of the equation. So we want to make sure we're focusing as much on the demand side of the equation, right? So that other goal, that 100% renewable electricity demand. And the easiest way to think about what electricity demand is this is what can homes do, what can businesses do, what can people do in their own life to help reduce costs. So can I put solar on my house? Can I become more energy efficient? Can I drive an electric vehicle? So we're looking at things that happen at the kind of the property and the personal side of things through this project. We went out and we secured funding. So this is fully grant funded by Partners for Places. The Cleveland Foundation, the Gunn Foundation funded a significant portion of this work. We put together a very collaborative effort that included a core team, which featured Whitnye, who was one of our core team members. So she's got some inside knowledge on this. And then a group of subject matter experts who we really wanted to leverage to support our existing efforts to get to that 100% goal and really expand upon it. We contracted with a company called GreenLink Analytics, who is a national leader on carbon footprint accounting, utility resource planning, social impact assessment, to help us develop a roadmap. So what can we do between now and 2050 to advance our effort here? So as we started this work, like we do with everything, we focused obviously on environmental and economic benefits that the transition could support, but we really, again, wanted to make sure we were centralizing equity in our process here. When we look at the energy space, we see more inequity in our community. So whether we're looking at jobs or energy burden, we have work to do in this area. This map here shows energy burden. This comes from GreenLink's equity mapping tool. And what we see nationally, generally electricity and gas account for about 3.6% of household expenses. In Cleveland, that percentage is much higher. It's about 6.5% on average. And you can see based on kind of these housing totals, a significant portion of our population is in housing units where they are experiencing either high energy burden or, in about 40,000 cases, severe energy burden, where they're paying over 10% of their household expenditures towards energy and gas. And that's just not sustainable long-term. That's not the way we want things to function. So we really tried to embed equity in here. It's a big report. There's a lot in there. We'll drop a link in the chat to the full report. And I would encourage you to take a look, but some of the key takeaways, I think there are three. And this is probably not surprising to anybody who really kind of follows this, but seeing the mathematical impact of it is pretty stark. And that is our ability to achieve what we need to do through local action alone is severely constrained by state policy. We just have not had a lot of support for clean and renewable and energy efficient investments over time, and that constrains what we can do. Even within those constraints, however, we can make significant positive impact on some of those key priorities that we outlined as we put this process in place. And that includes looking at energy equity. If we make these investments, we can drive down energy burden for residents. We can leverage this as an opportunity to bring in new jobs and create wealth. So asset ownership and wealth creation in our community. And then also, obviously, we're going to see improvements in human and neighborhood health. The cleaner we can get our energy generation, the less energy we can use through efficiency measures, the better off we're all going to be. Third, what we learned is we already have a pretty strong foundation of action to support this. And now we have kind of a fairly robust policy toolkit that we can draw on moving forward. This toolkit involves about 70 different policies or programs that we can pursue locally. I'm not going to go through them all. I would just mind-numbingly dry presentation if I did that. But again, take a look at the report. They're all outlined in there. We've assessed each one for its feasibility. So how financially feasible is it? How kind of technically and legally feasible is it, its carbon impact, and then its equity impact to create some sense of how to prioritize those. Some of those 70s are directly within the city of Cleveland, capital C government, city of Cleveland's control. Some will require utility support. Some are shared by the broader community. But because we kind of commissioned the report, we've focused most of it on city action. It doesn't mean that others haven't done good work or there isn't kind of a need for additional action from other players. We just wanted to use this as something that we could use to drive our municipal action as we move forward. So the green boxes on the right kind of have a summary of where we are. We've already implemented 11 of the actions. We've already committed at the city level to another 12. And Greenlink recommends there are 9 more that we should really pursue sooner rather than later. So we're working through what that implementation is going to look like moving forward, and are really excited to kind of get to work on implementing this important project. The next project I think I'll highlight is our Circular Cleveland initiative. This is another project that has been in various stages of development for about a year now. Last April, we got a notice that the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation was putting out a funding opportunity tied to the intersection of climate change and health. If you're not familiar with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, it is a health-focused foundation, and this was one of, if not the first pots of sustainability funding that they had ever opened up. And from our perspective at the city, the timing couldn't have been better. We were really beginning to come to grips with some of the reality around the changes that were coming to our recycling effort. And we were getting ready to launch this kind of full-scale reevaluation of the entirety of our waste management process, which we recently completed, and we can drop a link in the chat if you're interested in that as well. We got contacted and kind of connected with Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. If you're not familiar with Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, they do a ton of great work. And we were all kind of thinking about this grant in this same way at the same time, so that the timing really couldn't have been better. And it really gives us an opportunity to do something innovative and expand the conversation around waste management to include a broader set of longer term solutions, right? We're not going to recycle our way out of our waste problems. So we've got to take a look at other more circular solutions. So the city and CNP got together. We partnered up with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. If you're not familiar with Ellen MacArthur, they're really one of the global thought leaders on circular economy solutions, and put in an application and went through a very intensive evaluation process that lasted about 6 months. But in the end, we were awarded a little under $500,000 out of an available $3 million to launch our project. So Circular Cleveland, it's a 24 to 30 month effort. It's divided into 2 phases. It includes funding for a roadmap and a plan, which is great. We need a plan. But the thing we really like about this grant is it includes a significant portion of funds for implementation, right? So we've been working with Robert Wood Johnson over the past couple months, kind of standing the project up. Some things they really liked. They liked our equity focus. They liked the amount of community engagement we were proposing, and they liked the linkage that we have in our plan to global ideas. And if we're talking circular economy solutions, you have to look globally because those are the cities that are doing this well. Toronto, London, Milan, there's a host of them, but they tend to be driven by international cities to a certain extent. So we are very excited about this, right? This is a project that we think is going to take us from that linear economy, which you see here on the right, where we take resources, we turn them into things, and then we just waste, we throw them away, we get rid of them, to something that is more circular. So where we make it, we use it, we reuse it, we remake it, and then as a last resort, we recycle, right? So we can reduce the overall waste impact of this, create jobs, have a really big effect, hopefully from an economic development standpoint, right? So we think that doing this way is going to help us become obviously more environmentally sustainable. It's going to help us shape healthier communities and neighborhoods. And I think from our perspective, maybe most importantly, is create economic opportunity and wealth for residents. We want to get that income and get those new jobs that this can create available to residents. As we work to shape what the initiative would focus on, we identified 4 key principles. You can see those here on the left. So designing out waste and pollution, keeping products in use longer, regenerating natural systems, and then generating local wealth. So these are our kind of guiding principles that we have for the Circular Cleveland project. Good news is we are not starting from scratch. There is a ton of good activity already happening in the circular space around our city and around our region. Habitats Restore is probably one of the best examples that everybody's going to familiar with, but we've got activity happening in all of these different categories that you see kind of listed up here, whether it's, biomimicry, regenerative farming, refurbishment, manufacturing, like all of these great areas, we've got access going. We have a wonderful blog post on our website. Again, we'll drop a link in the chat. If you want to learn more about any of these different activities, it's a really fascinating way to see some of those things already in practice and how we can scale them up. So what are we going to do? What's going to be the deliverables? How does this work? We outlined 5 deliverables to Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. The first is obviously the roadmap. So that's a local scan of the market, a lot of data analysis, and then really kind of engaging with other cities to kind of get some of those best practices put together. I mentioned it earlier, but I'll say it over and over again. The thing we love about this grant is it has implementation funding attached to it. So that funding is going to fund kind of 3 major efforts. One is we're going to start a composting program at the West Side Market. So we produce a tremendous amount of organic waste there. How do we start to invest in composting to kind of reduce the landfill effect of that, but also create a monetizable product potentially? It has $75,000, give or take, for community-based projects. So these are small, almost micro grants to really spur kind of ideation and innovation at the neighborhood level. And then it has another $100,000 for small business loans, which will flow through the city's Department of Economic Development. We are really, really close to launching that first round of funding for those community-based projects. So if you have an idea or you think somebody might be interested in this, I would encourage you to participate in a series of upcoming workshops. We'll drop a link in the chat with those dates and that information. I think they're getting ahead of myself. April. I think they're April 21st, 24th, and 28th, but we'll put all of the specifics in the chat, or at least link to a place where you can find that information if you think that's something you might be interested in or someone you know might be interested in. Look, recycling is related to this work. And I know a lot of the folks on this call, based on the fact that you're on this call, they're probably concerned about recycling. And the city, what I want to stress is that the city remains committed to recycling, but it has to be recycling that works. And as you can see on the slide, our diversion rate in 2018 and 2019, the last full years of the program, was really, really low. And there are a host of factors about what is being accepted in the international markets and contamination and all of those things. But what we needed to do was hit the reset button on this. So the Office of Sustainability worked with the city's Division of Waste Collection, and they kind of managed all of the aspects of waste in the city, including recycling, to help them complete a review of the entirety of their waste management process. I mentioned that's done. I think we can share that link in the chat. We will be rolling out an opt-in recycling program and adding some drop-off locations. You should very soon start to see some additional information about how and when to opt in if you want to participate in that program. But we will be bringing back recycling in some form here in the not too distant future. Next, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about trees. I promised the 100% renewable and the circular Cleveland were the big ones. Now we're kind of into the quick discussion projects. We have a goal at the city of restoring Cleveland's tree canopy to 30% by 2040. Again, since you're on the call, I probably don't need to say this, but trees matter. Trees are a critical component of our urban fabric, and restoring tree canopy is a high priority, both for the city, but also for the broader community. We have seen quite a bit of activity in 2020 in support of this goal. The Cleveland Tree Coalition released an update on the tree plan, which we are participants in the Tree Coalition. Based on this report, it's really interesting to see kind of this play out from a kind of a measurable standpoint, but we can quantify some of the environmental and health benefits that our local tree canopy has. And this includes kind of these average environmental benefits from stormwater management and kind of shading and urban heat island reductions. And we see some of these environmental benefits in excess of $11 million a year. Our canopy, as it currently sits, has a lifetime carbon storage benefit of over $26 million. And we can also trace back kind of the benefits through the Ben mapping process, nearly $3.7 million of avoided negative health incidents. So we see less asthma because we have the trees that we have. Now, if we can grow the canopy, we can see even more benefits here. So it is scalable. It is kind of related to kind of getting more trees in the ground, which is a critical priority for us. But we've got to be a little bit honest about this, right? We're still challenged by several factors that have really slowed some of the progress. One is a lack of funding. The size and the scope of the need on an annual basis is large. We don't have a lot of public planting locations. So when we look through public right-of-ways, we don't see the same number of plantable locations that we would need to meet that demand, which tells us that this is going to require a broader private side commitment because we just don't have enough public land to put trees on to meet the need. And then candidly, there's a lack of trees. So if we could find the money, we could find the place to put them. There aren't enough trees right now in the region necessarily to be planted at the scale we would need to. So we're talking about scaling up and building infrastructure. While we have not completely reversed the trend, we have slowed the rate of loss. Since we launched the tree plan in 2015, we've gained about 1,200 acres, but we've lost about 1,600, right? So that equates to an annual rate of loss of about 75 acres, which is not great, but it's better, right? So it's less. We were losing about 97 acres per year before that. Now we've got it to about 75. So we're slowly making progress, but we have a lot of work to do. Additionally, we'll bring it up again. There's an equity dimension to this as well, right? So our canopy is not evenly spread across the community. So for example, our citywide canopy is about 17.8%, but in some of our neighborhoods, including Ohio City, it's a little bit higher, right? So I think it's about 20% right now in Ohio City. Now that's down from about 2% from the last time it was measured in 2017. So the map on the right shows that overall change between the 2011 and the 2017 canopy assessments. Those are the last 2 years that the county did that. This mapping system is publicly available. Again, we'll put a link in the chat if you want to go in and measure it. But this is Ohio City, right? So you can go in here and you can see all of those little pink dots and blobs. I can see them on my screen. Hopefully you can see them on yours. Those little pink dots and blobs are where canopy has been lost during that time period. So you can kind of see where we've seen it. The dark green spots, though, are where we've gained some canopy. So you can see where canopy, actually that's where there's no change. There's really dark green that's hard to see. So we're not seeing a lot of gain here. We're seeing loss, but not a lot of gain. And we've got to think about ways to kind of reverse that. We're doing that at the city level by investing, right? So the mayor committed in 2019 to an additional $1 million annually for tree planting. And you can see that that's already starting to pay dividends, right? So in 2020, we increased our planting by about 300% over the previous 5-year rolling average. And we anticipate expanding that amount again in 2021 and then again in 22 before we're kind of at our steady state of operations for the maximum amount we can plant in a year. But if we're going to reverse that trend, like I said, there are 2 additional things we need to focus on. One is an increased focus on maintenance of existing tree inventory, right? We still need to try to minimize the amount of trees that we're losing, and we're trying to focus on that at the city level. And then 2 is we've got to figure out a way to get more trees out of the public right of way and onto private property. And the second one is where the Tree Coalition comes in. So I kind of referenced them obliquely there at the beginning of this portion on trees, but the Tree Coalition is a collective of more than 40 organizations that have really committed to working and coordinating their planning and maintenance activities so that we can reverse this trend and really move towards achieving that broader tree canopy goal. So the logos on the left are kind of the executive committee. And then on the right, you can see a listing of all of those groups that have signed up to be members of the Tree Coalition. So there is a broad base of community support for this. We're just working through a very big set of challenges that we have to address. All right, only a couple more projects, I promise. I'll go fast with these last couple because I think I'm trying to keep an eye on time and I want to make sure I'm leaving enough space for questions here. Let's talk about park access, right? The city has a goal of having everyone within a 10-minute walk of a safe programmed park. Currently, as a city, we're at 83%, and that is really, really good. According to the Trust for Public Lands Park Score, that puts us well above the national average, which is about 55%. This is one of the big reasons that we saw our park score ranking increase in 2020 from number 35 to number 29. So we're looking at like the 100 largest cities. We've moved from 35th to 29th on that list in terms of park access. The map on this slide comes from the TPL's Park Score website, which is this really, really fun interactive feature that allows you to kind of go in and draw parks, right? So those green areas cover all the places where we have everybody's within a 10-minute walk. The really dark green are the parks themselves. Reds and oranges are those areas where they're not within a 10-minute walk, and that kind of peachy color is like industrial areas. So it's kind of factored out of the analysis. We'll put a link in the chat to the mapping tool, but I will warn you, it is incredibly addictive. I may or may not have spent about 45 minutes last night trying to draw parks to get to 100% with the minimum number of new parks needed. So if you log on to it, just give yourself a little bit of time because you're going to go down the rabbit hole like I did. We're not satisfied. We're continuing to work towards the 100% goal. We have a open grant right now in collaboration with the Trust for Public Land and the Urban Land Institute. We got it from the NRPA to really support the development of some improved engagement strategies around the city's capital park investments. What we want to do is we want to pilot it with Clark Park, which is kind of over at Clark and Train where they come together. We're looking to build a new park there. And we want to develop engagement strategies that happen before the parks get designed, which seems very kind of logical, right? And that way we can make sure we're aligning the community, the park and the amenities in the park to community needs and wants. So what does the community need this park to do and function as in their community? And we want to kind of front load that engagement so that the park doesn't get designed and then we ask people to react to it. We want to engage and kind of hear a little bit more up front. The last area I'll talk about, 2 quick updates on sustainable transportation. I will do these very, very quickly. Our goal is to make sure that our transportation networks are as safe for everyone as possible. The city and honestly, the broader community is really driving a lot of this interaction with the Vision Zero initiative, which looks to eliminate traffic fatalities and severe injuries. We've got a lot of Ohio City is well represented through Ashley Shaw and a few other folks kind of working on this project. Additionally, I hope that you've seen some of the shared mobility options that our city planning and operations teams have really worked hard to introduce in a safe fashion across downtown and some of our neighborhoods. And then lastly, we continue to make investments to improve the network with an eye on sustainability and safety for everybody. And this includes investing significant funds in pavement conditions to improve that pavement condition report so that the streets are better and they're safer because they're in better condition. We've increased the amount of bike infrastructure pretty significantly between 2011 and what we've got planned in the capital project through 2022. And we're also leveraging some new approaches on sidewalks to try to kind of enhance some of our sidewalks and have seen some about 547,000 square feet of sidewalk improvements over the last 3-4 years. So we're making progress there. Last one I promise is electric vehicles. We got to find a way to get to electric vehicles. If you look at the 100% renewable electricity demand report, you'll see a big demand in there to get to electric vehicles. We've started at the city level already transitioning our light duty fleet over. This is one of the pictures of our vehicles. Sorry, it's a little bit blurry. I jokingly told the fleet manager that I needed a sustainable Cleveland bumper sticker on it, and this is what they did and sent it back. I think this one is used by parking enforcement though. So I think he might've been messing with me again, but you'll see these driving around. We're adding more every year. The market is really making this a more viable options. Pricing and model availability are going to increase this trend. And additionally, we're working with a lot of regional partners to increase the public available charging stations, right? So we need to work on city fleets and make sure we've got the access through the city fleet process. But we also want to make sure that there's more charging infrastructure to kind of incentivize investment. We're using things like the VW settlement grants, which you may have heard about recently, and some other no-active funding sources to try to put some of these in publicly accessible locations. So I apologize for throwing so much at you in a short period of time. I should have warned you at the beginning as well that I like to talk and I get a little long-winded. But hopefully you can see that we've got a lot of good stuff happening and a lot of things that are working, that we're working through to try to get us to a better place. So I guess I'll stop there, and I thank everybody for listening and for the time, and I'd love to answer some questions. So I wasn't watching the chat because it's really distracting when I do that, and I get sidetracked and I go off the rails, but I did see some things popping in there. So hopefully we've got some good questions in there, and I'm ready to jump in and hopefully have a really good dialogue with everybody.
Well, thank you, Jason. That is a lot of information, a lot of great information nonetheless, and we will definitely be happy to share the slide with everyone afterward. I didn't see any questions. Well, I'm sorry, there is one question in the chat, and I have a couple to keep the conversation going too while we're waiting for folks to share their thoughts with us. So let's get back to Olivia's question. If you get the trees, and this is a common question, Jason, so I'm sure you get this all the time. If you get the trees, how do we ensure they are maintained and cared for so they grow into mature trees?
Yeah, maintenance is, when you talk to our urban forester, Jennifer Kipp, she will tell you that maintenance of the trees is probably more important than planting, right? Because if we can invest the money, and our average planting costs are a little bit higher than other folks' average planting costs because we have to use a very particular caliper of tree. It has to be hardy enough to exist in the right of way and live there. So we're buying bigger trees to start. I think it's 1.75 to 2.25 caliper trees. The average planting cost for that's between $400 and $500. And if we don't invest in the maintenance, you're basically just kind of
run the money away.
Yeah, it's you're throwing good money after bad if you're not going to do the maintenance on it. So the maintenance is critical, and Jennifer and her team, so we've tried to really increase the level of professionals, and this is not a last couple years thing, this is a longer term thing. It's really looking to increase the professionalization of our urban forestry staff. She has, I think, 7 ISA certified arborists on her staff. So that's kind of what we use, and everything they plant has a maintenance plan attached to it, and they've got dedicated zones, and we're working through that. A big component of it for us, though, and this is a little bit in the weeds, but it's really important, is our tree inventory exists right now in one system. It's called Tree Tracker, and it's kind of an industry standard system. Almost all of our other work at the city happens in a different system called CityWorks. We're transitioning all of our city operations to this new asset and work order management system called CityWorks. It's a great system. It is Esri, it's built on an Esri platform, so it's GIS and spatially based. We're looking to migrate all of that tree data from this kind of other standalone system into the overall asset and work order management system, so that we can make sure we're treating trees like the vital assets that they are. So now when you come to do capital projects, you're going to have all of that vital and critically important tree data in there. When we're doing a street project, if we're doing sidewalks, if there are water main breaks, if there are sewer issues, we see a lot of interaction between gas lines and trees. So all of that information now becomes centralized in one place, which will help us kind of even get, I think, even better on some of the maintenance questions. But that's a great question.
Thank you, Jason. Olivia, did that answer your question? Because I mean, there's also quite a few initiatives going on in the city. Councilman McCormick in Ward 3 is working with some of the residents in Ohio City specifically to address some of this, at least locally. So it really sounds like it has to be a hands on the ground, you know, a more locally led initiative where folks come together and understand the importance of making sure that the trees are taken care of, just as important as it is planting them. So well, thank you for sharing that, Jason.
Yeah, and I think the other half of that too is we can only manage what we can manage, right? And we're restricted in what we can't plant on private property, and we can't maintenance on private property. We're not allowed to make kind of improvements that would kind of improve personal private property. So any planting that happens outside of the right of way or outside of a city park is really going to fall in another group. But there are a lot of groups who are doing really good work. And if you want to know kind of the right way to maintain a tree, there are different trainings that you can look at. There's the Urban Tree Steward Program. I want to say Holden has some things. Western Reserve Land Conservancy does a lot. And I don't have those handy. And so I can't drop that in the link now, but Whitney, maybe we can share those with you and with Judy. And if you're interested in kind of accessing those programs, we can make that connection pretty easily. Kathy Len from my office is on this call as well. And Kathy may be able to add that in the chat. She may have that. Kathy's one of our tree experts, so she may be able to add that right into the chat on how to access some of those really great programs, the stewardship type programs.
Absolutely. And we can get some information from Kathy, or you can just type it into the chat, Kathy, anything that you can share with us. We did have a Forest City working group meeting today. So that
I put her on the spot there. So hopefully she doesn't get too mad at me tomorrow for that.
So here is another question, and kind of changing topics. Is anyone thinking of sending buses from the rec centers to Westside Market on Saturdays? They're doing this in Detroit and it is successful, and that's from Justine.
Boy, that's a really good question that I am going to have to get you an answer on. Honestly, the short answer, not that I am aware of, but that's a really interesting idea. So I'm going to have to look into that. Yeah. So Detroit is doing that. That's good to know. Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks, Jason. So next question this is a comment from Cindy. Glad to see she does have a question. Glad to see the composting program for Westside Market. We have so many restaurants in different areas of the city. Is there anything in place for them to compost collectively?
So right now, the solutions for those are going to be private solutions, right? So there are groups that are doing this and kind of collecting it. I think what we want to do is we want to take a look at this as a potential pilot. So how do we implement it in a place that's under our control at the city, like it's a city facility? How do we do that? And then how do we bring it to scale? But I think if you're looking at kind of the private side of things, there are Rust Belt Riders is a good example. There are others that are doing it. it's about bringing all of it to scale, bringing it to market and bringing it to scale is kind of a little bit of the challenge that everybody's having now. If we can make it work at the West Side market and it kind of does what we think it's going to do, I think there are potential for expansion moving forward. But that's going to be a little bit down the road after we do some evaluation of how it works.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, I want to say Minnesota, they have some infrastructure that comes from the city that includes composting in their trash and recycling pickup, which is amazing. So maybe that's something that we can, one of the suggestions we can make to City of Cleveland in the new infrastructure bill that Cleveland has received some funding for.
Yep.
All right. Next question. Are you looking at, from Rosalind, excuse me if I'm saying that incorrectly, are you looking at the composting system in Dollywood? They compost everything.
I think it would be a great excuse to go to Dollywood. We're taking a pretty broad look. So this is the West Side Market composting program is something that we have been trying to fund for a while now. We've applied for a couple of different grants, and for whatever reasons they didn't go through. We had a lot of interest from a grant program that got canceled because of COVID, so we're taking a pretty broad scan for the best solution that we can find. So there are a whole host of systems that we're going to try to take a look through and try to get our hands on and maybe do a little bit of demonstration and work through that process. But yeah, we want to look at pretty much anything that's on the table.
And this is coming from me. So just for anyone who's unfamiliar with Dollywood, can you explain where that is, what that is? And maybe a little bit more about their composting program?
Yeah, I believe it's in Tennessee. I believe it's like an amusement park in Tennessee, but I have not been, but I've heard it's fun.
And Olivia is shaking her head yes. All right, thank you. Awesome.
Olivia will co-sign it's fun. That's good. There we go.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we have another question from Olivia, and I'm just going right down the chat. So does Sustainable Cleveland work with Ohio EPA's materials marketplace in terms of bolstering the circular economy?
That will be part of what we are looking at through the Circular Cleveland Initiative. This is a great opportunity for us because we're going to go pretty broad in how we attack this. And as we do that scan and we look at the gaps and the opportunities for us, I don't want to presuppose what that's going to point to, but I think that's going to be one of the solutions that is going to rise to the top pretty quickly, right? I mean, we're really close, and I think I can say this publicly. It's not a public procurement, so I can say this publicly. But we're really close to having the consultant to do the roadmap on board. Public procurement rules, we've got to be fairly careful in how we talk about things, but it's running through CNP. But yeah, we're close to having that consultant on board. We think that's going to be about a 7 to 9 month process. And at the end of that, I think we're going to have a pretty good direction for how that wants to go. I'm looking in the chat now because I saw a private one pop up, and I'll answer that in a second. But does the city work with Rust Belt Riders for composting initiatives? We are supportive of what they do. I don't know that we've got any dedicated contracts with them, but we've worked with them kind of in the past as they stood up. I did get a private one in here, Whitney, which I'll go ahead and answer because I'm sure a lot of folks are thinking this one. How much of the millions coming to Cleveland from DC would go to develop our sustainability? Where'd I go? Where's the question? Our sustainability initiatives that you outlined tonight. That is a fantastic question that we don't have an answer for yet. We are working through what some of the restrictions on that money is going to be. The first batch of stimulus funds were fairly restricted in how they can be used. I don't anticipate that we haven't seen the final rules yet. I don't anticipate that these will be that tightly limited, but we are taking a look at how we can leverage some of those. I think from a city perspective, and this isn't just a sustainability thing, again, all of the options are on the table that we can use to look at that as an investment that can pay long-term recurring benefits back for residents. So the short answer is we don't know yet, but we're still working through exactly what that's going to look like and how it's going to be spent.
Awesome. So a question from Patrick. Let me see if I can find it. How much interaction is there between the city and the county?
A lot. A lot. Yeah, Mike Foley and Mike's my counterpart over at the county. We work pretty closely on a lot of things. So I think, from just a simple coordination standpoint, we host every month a kind of a sustainability group that meets out once a month. We kind of co-host that, where we talk about important topics and kind of things that are coming down the road, things we should be aware of, state level things. We've brought in state legislatures. I talked about 100% renewable electricity demand there this past Friday. On a more practical sense, we work very closely. So the county has done a really good job with their tree grant program, for example, of filling some of the gaps that we can't fill at the city level. So counties, agents of the state, they have some different rules on how they can use funds. So we do planning in the right of way. We have started really coordinating that through the Tree Coalition. The county funds kind of neighborhood and community level projects. So I think they funded neighborhood level tree inventories in 4 neighborhoods last year. I have not heard about the awards for this year. I don't know if those are public. I think the grant announcements may have been made this week. And they're doing more this year. So we've committed our $1 million to planting in the city. They've created they have allocated $1 million. Now it's countywide, but a significant amount of that flows into the Cleveland neighborhoods. So we coordinate a lot with them there. We're doing a lot of coordination with Mike and his team around electric vehicles. So as we look to build this public side charging infrastructure, kind of making sure that we're not applying for charging stations and locations that the county was intended to serve, and they're not doing the same. So kind of both coordinating through NOACA to do that. Look, the thing about this is, and this is why it's important to have good partners, both at the county, but in our suburban communities, and then all the way good partnerships at the state. Climate change isn't a Cleveland problem. It's not a problem that Cleveland on its own can solve, right? It is truly a global phenomenon, but so we need to work collectively, even within our region, to find the right balance of solutions and things. So Mike and I work very closely together, and I hope he would say this as well, but I think we have a pretty good working relationship between our 2 offices moving forward. So
That's awesome. Thank you, Jason. So please feel free to add more questions to the chat. I'm going to go down my list of questions that I have for you, Jason,
Sure.
and hopefully this will spark more conversation. So going back to the idea of clean, renewable energy, first, can you explain, is there a difference between those 2 terms, clean and renewable?
Yeah, there is. And we use them interchangeably a little bit. So I guess, what I would say is, and let me see, I might be able to share this with you because I can give you, I might have the report. I got the report opened up here. Let me see if I can find the language we use. Clean for us includes solar, it includes wind, it includes hydro, it includes geothermal, it includes biogas. And then the biggest component of it that often gets missed in discussions of clean energy is energy efficiency, right? I cannot find what I was looking for, but so yeah, hold on a second. I lost my ability to see everybody. Where'd that go?
Yeah, we see you just fine.
You can see me and hear me. You're not seeing my blank PDF there.
No.
No, you're visible.
All right, I'm just going to close that PDF then and do this the old-fashioned way. So hopefully you can. There we go. Everybody's back. We do not include nuclear in ours. Some definitions will. We do not. But we often lose sight of the energy efficiency component of it, right? This notion that the cleanest kilowatt of energy is the kilowatt you don't use. So we tend to group it that way. But yes, you've got to be, when you hear people, and I should have been better from this when I was talking, but when you hear people kind of interchangeably use clean and renewable, those may mean different things based on what you're talking about. But for us, it's wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, biogas, and then energy efficiency.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, no.
So with the 100% renewable energy plan, that report that was just put out by Office of Sustainability, I guess it's an interesting topic. It's an interesting process and question, just because when we look at the Green New Deal, which the young, what's her name? AOC. I just know
Alexandria Ocasio.
Thank you, Cortez. Yes, that's her. She presented that a couple years back, and there seems to be so much controversy whether that's the direction the country should go or whether it's the direction the country shouldn't go. So I guess when thinking about all of that, we see the benefits. We see up front there may be like a humongous financial and economic investment to make that happen. If we're working toward becoming 100% renewable energy city by 2050, what does that look like? And that's a very broad question, and I want you to answer that just as best you can based on what the studies that you've done, the research that you've done. And we look at smaller cities like Burlington, Vermont. They're 43,000 population, and Aspen, Colorado, they're about 7,000 population. Smaller cities, and they're only to about 70%. So with Cleveland being close to 400,000 in population, what does that process look like for us, for this city?
So, all right. So when we looked at, and I'll try to answer this as succinctly as possible without kind of getting too deep in the weeds of the economic modeling, because it can get very wonky and mathematical very quickly. So what I will say is this is what we're looking at is fuel mix, right? So we're mapping the fuel mix of Cleveland's energy market. And right now, if we do nothing other than, so our report models, it uses this, it's called ACES, the Advanced Clean Energy Scenario Tool. And it's built on a machine learning model that it uses to estimate hourly demand profiles for about 60 different building types that are specific to Cleveland: occupancy rate, size, age, conditions, and then a whole bunch of regional factors kind of pump into this thing. And it outputs a whole host of benefits from carbon reduction, from economic benefits, from jobs created, incomes, deferred health, bill savings, all of these different things, right? And what it does is it tells us how far we can get and how far away we're going to be under different conditions. And then it assumes that to get to 100%, we're going to go buy renewable energy credits, right? So if you're not kind of familiar with what a renewable energy credit is, it's a certificate. You actually get a little piece of paper, believe it or not, that says you've purchased electricity, you're paid to buy this certificate from somebody who is generating clean energy somewhere, right? And you backstop with that. RECs they're a strategy. They're a perfectly valuable strategy. We use them in Cleveland now. Our community choice aggregation program gets 100% of it clean energy for residential and small commercial CEI customers through that process. But we're buying RECs, right? RECs are not an optimal strategy, and it is not our intent to rely heavily on those at the end of this process. So that's all a roundabout way to kind of set the frame. So we modeled 3 pathways in our report. One is the business as usual pathway, where we basically don't do anything different than we're doing now. Market forces are going to drive some change, right? Solar prices are falling, so we're going to see solar growth even if we don't do anything in our market. But we just kind of let the market be the market. And at the end of that process, at 2050, in order to get to our 100% goal, we're going to buy 5 million renewable energy credits, right? So we're basically covering, I think it's about 54% of our total demand from renewable energy credits. So we started this project, and I'll speak for myself, and I'll speak for other people on our team that I've talked to. So we started this project and said, this is exciting. We're going to get out of the REC business. Like, we're not going to have to do this, right? Like, so we modeled these 3 scenarios out. And at the end of the maximum pathway, if we do everything we can do as a capital C city of Cleveland, the government, and then the lowercase c city of Cleveland, the broader community, right? We still have to buy 3.5 million renewable energy credits. So we're able to reduce that REC demand by 30%, right? And that's partially a big increase in energy efficiency, right? So if we make the investments we need, we're lowering the overall demand with energy efficiency. We're seeing more solar growth. We're not seeing a lot of wind happening. And there's some very Ohio specific reasons we're not seeing a wind, but we still have a decent chunk of our power coming from coal, a little bit from natural gas, and nuclear. So I think at the end of that process, what you'll see is about, I want to say it's like 65 to 67% of the fuel mix are coming from what we would consider to be clean sources versus those more fossil fuel-based sources. We were surprised, honestly, when we saw that number of the required renewable energy credits at the end of this process. And that's where we really pushed back on the consultant and said, this doesn't look like what we expected. What's going on here? And this is that limiting effect of state policy. So when we look at what we can do from a development standpoint, you don't see a lot of wind because wind is hard to develop in Ohio. I mentioned right now that our community choice aggregation, so those residential aggregation program that we fund for that we coordinate for CEI customers, that's 40 to 45,000 customers that are getting 100% clean energy through that program. And that in and of itself is great. That is a good thing. But we are buying renewable energy credits from a wind farm in Texas. That's how we're achieving that right now. So we are outsourcing almost all of the environmental benefit with that, right? Like global emissions come down because we do this, and that's great, but we're not kind of localizing that effect, and we're outsourcing that economic benefit. Like somebody in Texas is building wind turbines, and they're maintaining and they're operating them. What we want to do is we want to get to a point where we're not outsourcing that benefit, where we're keeping it here locally. So that's a very long-winded answer to, I think the question is, at the end of the mix, we still have about 35% fossils that we're using RECs to purchase, and the remainder of it is coming from what we would consider to be clean sources. But we want to get out of that REC business. We want to keep those jobs here. We want to keep the economic money here. We want to keep it in circulation. I mean, the maximum case pathway, I think we're looking at a net benefit of $1.5 billion. It's billion with a B. So when we factor out what we have to pay to build all of this stuff and what it costs to fund the programs, we're still net positive. I want to say $1.5 billion. That's a lot of money. It's 5,000.
That's a big number
5,000 new jobs
for a city. Yeah, that's a nice number.
Hey, Jason, can you tell us what are the politics of wind energy? You kind of alluded to the fact that it may be a long time before we have wind energy in Ohio. And, you know, we have this incredible lake that produces a lot of wind. And it's just, I think, hard for a lot of people to understand why we don't have wind turbines out on Lake Erie.
Oh, man. So I am a public employee, so I will avoid the politics of it, right? But I think we can point to some specific policies that have been enacted over time that have undermined this, right? There were changes to wind setback rules about 5 years ago. So the distance that a turbine has to be from property lines really stifles onshore wind development. The offshore wind dimension that I would assume you're looking at LeadCo's Project Icebreaker. That's more of a demonstration project, right? That's not looking to create a whole bunch of new energy. It's really testing the technology and looking at, can we make this model work here before we take it to scale? But I think the faster turnaround would be on onshore wind. And if you go, I want to say it's over by Ada, if you head west in Ohio, kind of out like Route 30 or out I-70, and then kind of over there by Ohio Northern University, kind of over by the Indiana border, there's a pretty large and substantial wind farm over there. And I think that is one of the only, if not the only, major wind farm in Ohio. We're looking at a lot of solar growth here locally, and that doesn't make us that weird. Just the technology is evolving a little bit more rapidly. Pricing is coming down is the big thing. So pricing for solar is coming way, way down.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. And Judy, did you get that question out of the chat, or did you happen to ask that on your own? Because that
was mine. I think but I think somebody was wanting to know why we don't have wind on Lake Erie.
Bob.
I have to mention that originally I'm from Kansas, and in fact, I'm getting ready to go home to visit my family. And from Kansas City all the way out to way in western Kansas, almost to the border with Colorado, you will find numerous wind farms. And that state has figured out a way to harness one of its, its products, and it's wind. There are no trees in Kansas, hardly any, but they have lots of wind. And many of those landowners and farmers have leased their land for these different utilities to produce electrical power. So I wish this could happen in Ohio on a bigger scale.
Big open flat spaces
Yeah.
with lots of wind, and those are ideal conditions for wind development. You know,
Yeah.
Kansas,
That makes
Oklahoma,
sense.
Texas are some of the big ones. Yeah, kind
Yeah.
of that.
Mhm. Yeah, flat plains
Yep.
type locations. Yeah, or tornadoes.
Strong wind.
Yeah.
I can say that I'm from Oklahoma, so I can say that.
Yeah.
A couple more questions. So with regard to energy efficiency, how soon can we expect to see 50% of city vehicles be all electric?
So we're working through what that number looks like now. We're doing a little bit of a fleet assessment to kind of figure out, based on condition and then replacement schedules, what's a reasonable expectation for that. Our focus right now is obviously light duty fleet. So cars, SUV, small SUVs, pickup trucks. And then we'll have to scale that out on some of the more kind of the bigger kind of vehicles. But I would hope in the not too distant future we'll be in a better position to answer that. We have a lot of light duty vehicles in the city of Cleveland that we've got to kind of figure out what that assessment process looks like.
Yeah, I think so too. So will the new police headquarters on Kinsman be a LEED certified building?
That is the plan. Yeah. We have a building policy in the city that I think requires everything to be silver or better. But we're having discussions a lot around how aggressive to be on that. And but yeah, the plan is for it to be a LEED certified building. Yes.
Awesome. And then we have one more comment. Lack of wind development in Ohio is due to NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and fossil fuel industry lobbying. So, and that's a comment coming from Patrick. Any thoughts on that, Jason?
Yeah.
Gotcha. I got it.
Yeah. No, it's there is a lot of that. Yes.
Well, so Jason, one of the things that I initially talked to you about, and one of the reasons why I was motivated to start these community discussions is that what role do we as just individual citizens of the city, what is our role in really, looking at climate change? I mean, it's wonderful to learn about all the various initiatives and projects that the city has. But what can you tell each of us? What is it? What is our responsibility? What should we be doing? Because this is not going away. I mean, climate change is just going to become ever present and top of mind as the year moves on and the coming years. And so as I've shared with you, I feel we all have to get involved and get engaged. But what are some suggestions that you want to give to people on how they might get involved, either in one of your committees, in one of your projects? Because you certainly the city has a lot of things going on that I think would be of interest to individuals.
Yeah, I think getting involved is obviously a great way to do it. So there are a lot of touch points to engage with this. The thing that I like about working in sustainability is, I outlined, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, however many big kind of projects that we're working on at the city. But the principles of all of those projects hold when you take it to the individual level as well, right? So look at your own property and find a place to plant a tree if you can, right? Look at how you're using materials and things in your house. I mentioned at the beginning, I have a 5-year-old. If you have small children, tell them some of this stuff and they will drive you like they will force you to do things differently. If I don't put my recycling together in the right way, my 5-year-old will flag it for me. But all of those things that we're talking about. So we're talking about composting at the West Side Market. Figure out if composting is something that you can support at your own home, and how do you kind of do that in your own way? Find partners. And I think Whitney can help point you to some of the ones who are doing it kind of at a micro level, and kind of, we can give you some resources to help you kind of figure out how to do it and how to do it the right way. I think if you're buying a car, look at an electric vehicle, right? Is it something that you can manage, or do you need a car at all? Can you access public transportation? Can you find ways to do that? If you have a car, but maybe once a week, take the bus, right? Like, slowly build to it. I think, one of the things that I think we've got to remember to do as well is, I have not met anyone yet who leads a perfectly sustainable life. Like, we all have little things that we do that are not 100% sustainable, and that's okay. The key thing is to continue to try to find little things to do and add little things to your own kind of lifestyle that you can continue to build upon it day after day after day, right? So, we've all been doing this in one way or another most of our life, right? How many times when you were a kid did your mom tell you to turn the water off when you were brushing your teeth? That's sustainability. And we need to recognize that and kind of use that as a building and teachable moment. So continue to build on things, continue to teach folks, and just really be aggressive and kind of, kind of dedicated and intentional with the types of things that you're doing, whether it's recycling at home, whether it's composting, whether it's turning lights off, whether it's buying an electric vehicle, which is a big expense, but right, it's getting cheaper and cheaper every year, whether it's looking at solar for your house. We have a solar co-op in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, but they serve Cleveland as well. So is solar something that you could support on your home? If not, how do I find other ways to kind of offset that? We've got a lot of good links and tips on our website, so maybe we could drop that in the chat. I don't know, Elza, Kathy, if one of you guys could add that in there for me, that'd be great.
Also added the sustainability resources for individuals. Is that the efficiency tips?
That's the one.
Is that the link you're thinking? Yeah, she's on it.
Yeah. I'm gonna claim that she did that after I said it, because she's making me look bad by putting all these things in the chat before I said it. But yeah,
no, you both look great. You have someone that knows what you're going to say.
Individual action is critically important. This is not something that any one government, any one agency is going to be able to solve. And I borrow this from Mayor Jackson because he says this all the time, and I think it's true. Every good thing that we've been able to do as a city, we've been able to do it because we did it collaboratively and together. Yeah. And that's how we go to attack this problem. And Judy, I think discussions like this, just having a group of people who are committed enough to spend an hour and a half on it's Wednesday, right? Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Listening to some boring guy drone on for an hour and a half about this stuff. Just the fact that we can have these discussions, that we can have kind of these things, these little things are even important. We were talking a little bit about it before. It's modeling behavior, right? Behavioral contagion. It's a real thing. So how do we model behavior for our friends and our neighbors and slowly shift what they do? So there's a whole host of things we can do. I could just ramble, but I feel like I've been doing that for a while, so I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No, it's all good. Yes, I agree with Judy. It's great information. And can you answer just one more really quick question? Is the city working with the Cleveland 2030 district?
Yes, we are. Cindy over at 2030 district. I'm actually on the 2030 district board.
Can you explain what 2030 district is?
Yes.
For us who don't know.
The Cleveland 2030 district is a organization, and Cleveland has one, but I think there are 22 of them across the country, maybe 23. I think Cincinnati just launched one. 2030 district is basically, they focus on commercial properties and industrial properties and try to help them model and understand water and energy efficiency in the building to lower their overall electric, gas, and water footprint. So we work very closely with 2030 district. They actually have also, at the very beginning, kind of at the beginning of my thing, I talked about the 53 working groups that kind of evolved and turned into businesses and nonprofits. Cleveland 2030 district is one of those success stories we generally point to there. So we do work very, very closely with 2030 district. I was talking with Cindy over there earlier today about ways that they can help plug into the 100% renewable report, because as you look at the recommendations, and one of the things that we've already flagged is the completed steps in there is to have a voluntary reporting mechanism for commercial properties for energy efficiency. That is the 2030 district. So we are ahead of the curve because we have Cleveland 2030 district here. So yeah, we work, again, I apologize, a long answer to a simple question. Yes, we do work with Cindy and the folks at 2030 district pretty regularly. And if you haven't attended they have building education series. They're targeted to a certain extent at commercial properties, but anybody can register for them, and they are absolutely wonderful sources of information. Let's see if Elza can beat me before I say that we should post the link to those in there, but we can share those. Yep, there she goes, 2030 district. But yeah, so a lot of really good information through those building education series that even though they're kind of targeted to commercial properties, they still hold up.
I think for everybody on the call too, we'll follow up with everyone with a document that has all these links and websites in it. So if you haven't had the chance to write them down as we've gone through this presentation, we will put them into one document. We'll email it to everybody that signed up on Eventbrite and get it out to you. And that way you can do your own kind of investigating and research.
Yep. And I would be remiss. I've called out Elza and Kathy. Deepa Vidabius is also on our call. She was the project manager for the 100% renewable electricity demand report. So she took hopefully took a couple of days to rest and recover from that, because that was a big lift. So Deepa is with us as well. So
great.
And she did great. Thanks, Deepa. So we are nearing the end of this conversation. Jason, thank you so much for the information you've shared, your expertise, your knowledge. It seems to go very deep. So if we want to have another conversation, I'm sure you'll have more information to share with us. But in the meantime,
I have talked too much. I will never get invited back. That's my run out the clock so that you never invite me back again.
No.
That is not true. Not true.
Not true at all.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We want to announce the 3 winners of the book that we are raffling off this evening. And it does go to folks who have stuck out the entire presentation with us. So again, thank you for being here. And we will be sending a copy of, Judy, I'll let you say the name of the book. And Jason, if you want to remind us how you know the author.
So the name of the book is Just Sustainabilities, and it's by Dr. Julian Adjerman. I don't know if I got that right. Close enough. Okay. And Jason knows this gentleman personally, and he was the keynote speaker at the last sustainability summit. So take it away, Jason.
Oh yeah, no, Dr. Adjerman. I referenced you. This is one of those questions. I shouldn't give this away, but I was talking with Whitney and Judy beforehand. These are the types of things that I just obsess. Right? Like I just went back and forth. They said, tell us a book. And I went through like 4 or 5 different books and kept going back and forth. But I figured the fact that I called this one out in the presentation, I should go with this one. It really is a great read if you want to understand what we're trying to do and centering our sustainability work on equity, and how we can use sustainability and the investments that we need to make to create a more just and fair community. And I think with Mayor Jackson's focus on that and the way that has become a priority for our office over the last 12 or 13 years, it was just too on point not to reference. So I hope you all enjoy it. It's a fabulous read. If you read it and you want to talk to me about it, I think my contact information is at the end of the presentation. I've gone a little stir crazy with COVID, so feel free to call me, feel free to email me. I love talking to people. So I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on the book after they have a chance to read it.
Thank you
Maybe
very
we can
much.
have another conversation on the book specifically. So, well, Patrick, Rosalind, and Bruce, you will be receiving a free copy of the book. So thank you all for being here. And if there are any other questions, please feel free to email us. Email Jason. We'll get all of this information packaged up to you and provide some potential next steps. Although this is the last of our series, be on the lookout for more climate change initiatives as we develop more ideas around this important topic.
Thank you very much, Jason.
No, thanks everybody for having me.
And your team.
Thank you, Jason and Judy. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Thanks, Whitney. Bye-bye.
Bye. And thank you, Elsa. You were awesome.